Hello, everybody. Welcome to Augmented Society Network, a thematic network of the RSA. We are here to talk about how society is going to be augmented by technologies, systems, people helping people, all of those things. It's all fair game in our sessions. And we've got a really interesting session, even without what happened in Glasgow, it's 2 weeks ago now with COP26, where there were all these nations coming together talking about the environment. When Zoe and I were setting up our schedule at the time, it was just a matter of people starting to travel and the question of how much pollution happens with travel, and that there was a entity that was saying, we're going to take all of the bad stuff out of the air and put it through a cleaner. And then you find that that cleaner took so much more energy than just leaving the bad stuff in the air, all those types of things. And we decided, let's look at how is technology, how are we going to affect climate in the future to try to hopefully clean things up. We weren't so smart to look at the schedule of what was going on. So the fact that COP26 did come up, and the fact that even something like, hey, let's all get together and talk about abatement of coal use, and they're going through the agreement, and lo and behold, India and Russia say, no, we're out. It really fit perfectly with the can't stop, won't stop. So it's really, what are we looking to give up? And so to take us further into the topic, Zoe Camper, take us away.
This is a topic which clearly has been part of our lives. This is a concern that's been part of our lives for very, very many years. It's a huge issue that was something that has sort of become a theme of protest and marches and a lot of action on making a change. And we still haven't made that much of a dent in things. In the description, we talk about recycling, splitting objects out and putting them in different waste bins or trash cans. Some people are doing it, some people are not. My issue is that it requires us on an individual level to do something. But the pressure on us as individuals is huger than the pressure that is currently applied to organizations, companies, manufacturers, and government. And I think that pressure is unfairly placed on us. However, it will take us to make a difference. And this isn't about a social media campaign. It's about changing fundamentally what we do. And in one of our sessions, we had a great change in how we were talking about things, and we put ourselves into the picture and we discussed things directly from what we were going to do. And that changed how I spoke about things. And I talked about exactly what it was that I was going to do. And I did that. And I felt a huge strength from that. So it's a bit of a dichotomy, really, about how and who you are in this conversation and in this action against who else is involved, what they need to do, and how we're all going to get to that. So it's a matter of putting yourself in there first, but then it's also a matter of thinking about what's going on around you. And I saw an interesting piece about one of the big coal companies, and I think it was the chairman of the board of directors was saying that to move away from coal is expensive, and it would take coal money to take this particular company into a regenerative form of power. Now, I thought, okay, interesting, but pension funds have been dropping coal, have been dropping cigarettes, have been dropping the things out of their pension pots for quite a few years now. So the argument of, well, actually, this is so part of our fabric that we need to be careful about this no longer exists. I don't think it's as relevant because it's not part of something that our wider society is relying on. So I actually thought this company should really just be allowed to go. What are we talking about here? And there's a fantastic way in which sometimes people speak, which is a way of making statements. You know, here's the thing, this is it, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you that this is going to be the case. And I'm hearing language like that from organizations like that, where a statement-led approach to their marketing, which can be very off-putting because you think, oh, okay, so it is going to be that, is being entwined with an ever decreasing relevance to all of our futures. So part of the issue for me is, let's look to personally and on a wider scale, do something about this. And I know everyone here will be doing one thing or another, or probably lots of things. But what are we actually going to do now? How are we going to move forward? So my opening question is, who has something that they've done personally that could be scaled up, could be used, could be implemented, or has been implemented? And how do you feel about the pressure that's put on you individually to be green and to care, and for it to be almost, we were talking about shaming as a way of making people do things last month. Mitch, you brought that in. I think, Jonathan, you did as well. I mean, that's no way to be in a modern society.
Don't shame me into agreeing to my shame mention, just saying.
What?
Sorry.
What is that? So I'd like it if you made more sense than Jonathan. So if anyone would like to open up and help us into this topic, we would be very grateful. We never come with answers here. You should know that right from the start, but we do hope that you'll enjoy the conversation. So who's doing something?
So I'll just say two small things, okay, that I've been doing. I've been increasingly on local errands, bicycling rather than driving to them. So if it's less than 3 or 4 miles away, I'll try to, and my wife actually has been doing that for 20 years. So, and I just basically started, but today I had to pick something up at the pharmacy, which is about 3 miles away from us, 5 kilometers roughly. And basically, just bicycled to the pharmacy, picked it up and bicycled back. So one is is driving less. And the other thing, and again, these are just small things, but we're eating vegetarian probably 3 days a week, whereas we used to eat meat or fish, virtually all the time. And so it's just a little bit less.
Matthew, you were talking about a paper that you've been influenced by. Can you outline that for us?
The paper which I came across a while ago, it's open source, by the way, so a scientific paper, but it's looking at the kinds of actions that are most commonly recommended, and then looking at the ones which are most effective. And I can never remember the exact order, but the 4 most effective ones are having one less child, giving up the car, never flying, and adopting a plant-based diet. And they contrast that with all of the emphasis that's put onto recycling, a perfectly valid strategy, but doesn't actually save all that much carbon in the long run. And I think it's something I've been trying to spread around, because I think actually the actions that are really effective are actually really quite hard. I think particularly giving up the car. Okay, fine if you live in a walkable or cyclable area, but if you live in the kind of urban areas that we've been building for the last 50 years, pretty difficult actually, because they're built around the motor car, and if you have pavements, they may not be very pleasant, or they may not lead to useful destinations for you. I think probably out of those 4, probably going veggie is the easiest for most people, and an important one. Depending, the article goes on to, it has sort of error bars on each of these impacts, which depend on whether, for example, you have a decarbonized electricity supply. In that case, some of these actions are less impactful than others, or depending on the carbon footprint of the kind of meat you eat. So obviously, ungulates, cows, sheep, and goats are high carbon because they burn methane, whereas pork and chicken and some turkey and so on are lower carbon. So it's really quite subtle. I mean, that's the headline, is those four things, but it's really a really good way of analysing it, I find. I recommend, sorry, last comment is Google a footprinting tool and just see where your impacts lie, because I found that really useful too. Home heating is a real killer. Gas-fired central heating.
And isn't there a one thing that you've already done that you're clearing up, and then the other thing which you haven't done, so you're stopping? And I think there's an interesting divide there. Just very briefly though, Mitch.
Yeah, sorry.
You cannot retrospectively have one less child.
No, exactly.
Really sorry.
Sometimes I wish I could, but I can't find anyone to take one or two of my children. So
Amy'd like that as well. Yeah, no, it's not possible. Sorry, Matthew. I just had to jump.
Indeed.
But Matthew, that article you bring up, it's from IOP Science. It was written by, it's a letter, open access, Seth Wines and Kimberly Nicholas. It was published in July of 2017.
Yeah.
We're 4 years plus since. Yeah. And so all of these things are out there, and it's such a conflict on so many ways, because again, with the title of Can't Stop, Won't Stop, I so want to do things, but I can't do that. And there was a study that The Guardian published a few weeks ago where they polled 1,000 people across 10 countries, and like 60% said, I can't financially afford to make those efforts. Or I lack I lack information and guidance about what to do. 39 saying, I don't think individual efforts can really have an impact. Before the pandemic, we moved from a house where we knew exactly where our recycling was going. Like, we saw the big recycling truck come, and we moved into an apartment, and we've got to shoot for recycling, and we've got to shoot for trash. And I don't know that they're actually going into separate bins. And then we find out that it's too cost prohibitive, that even if municipalities separate recyclables, whether anything's happening, because they actually would have to pay somebody to take that away. Whereas just 10 years ago, there were entities in Asia that would pay for it. So it was a revenue generator as opposed to a money loser. So it's like all of these things, it's yet another instance where there's so much confusion, perhaps misinformation, perhaps sounds lovely, but not practical. That's my struggle. I really want to do the right thing. I really obviously want to leave a better world for future generations. What do we do?
Just to kind of piggyback on that, those of you that know me, I am a 7th grade science teacher. So it is amazing to me just what in the last 20 years, I feel like the needle has moved backwards as far as awareness goes. My students and my families, perhaps because more of them are immigrants, they do not understand even what it means to be environmentally responsible. So I think it's tough to get a lot of momentum for legislation and things that we need for people to kind of collectively say, okay, we're going to have to save us from ourselves, because just like Jonathan said, I can't afford to get rid of my car because it's 110 degrees in the summer. I can't always wait around for the bus stop. The bus stops are not shaded here. So a lot of what I try to do is to do basically Earth Day type of units. We do a lot with not just recycling, but what is our carbon footprint? What is our environmental impact? But if anything, over the course of my career, the awareness has shrunk instead of increased.
What do you put that down to, Amy?
I wish I knew. I mean, I think part of it is just overall distraction. I think we have in the United States a very celebrity worship culture of just fun and entertainment, as opposed to civic responsibility. There's a lot of competing attention out there. There could be some sort of lobbying campaign. I mean, I don't always follow all the dollars, but I have no doubt that the coal industry, just like the tobacco industry and a lot of others, I mean, they want to protect their bottom line. So because education is so underfunded in the United States, a lot of teachers are downloading curriculum for free off the internet. And guess who's putting it out there? I'll tell you, it's not the environmental stewards, it's those companies.
And that goes back a long time. I did my primary schooling in Australia, and I remember we used to get these magnificently illustrated books, which were surprisingly very, very supportive of mining or primary production or something. I found out years later was supplied by all sorts of lobby groups to primary school, to needy primary schools.
But it's interesting you said, the immigrants coming in. I don't know what you mean by immigrants. It's a very interesting. I'm an immigrant to Canada from the UK, and my dad's an immigrant of many times over from India and so forth. So, I don't think it's a question of immigrants. I always tell the story to people. I said, I'm from the UK, came to Canada, and I'm a North American European guy, and I went back to India, worked in India, lived in India with my family, and they don't use toilet paper. They don't use toilet paper. They use a hose. You say that to any North American that they should give up the toilet paper for the environment. Oh my God, the looks I get. Like, what are you? That's disgusting. I'm like, well, Indians don't use toilet paper. They're like, what do you mean? I go, they use a hose. They use water. I had the discussion with my son just last night about that because he uses toilet paper. So, well, son, and your grandfather and your uncles and everybody, aunts in India don't use toilet paper, and that's environmentally friendly, right? And that's true because toilet paper industry is crazy. That's one thing, and two, we're all most of us here are technology literate in some shape or form, and we just saw that the Staples Center is now becoming the crypto center, the largest naming rights of all time, and how much energy does technology take to fuel itself? Massive amounts of server, so then the question becomes, what is our fuel source? Now, if you're India or China, which just said no, now you're clashing with the poverty industry, which the West has always said, we want to eliminate poverty in India and China, and India's and China saying, yes, we are eliminating poverty, but on our terms, which means you guys have had a chance to use coal and build your industry and build your nuclear reactors. In the case of China, they have nuclear power. They are building out nuclear capabilities at a very extensive rate. In case of India, they're playing catch up on the nuclear side. So the only energy that India can possibly use for its 1 billion people is in fact coal. It has no other options. So there's no answer to these things, but you're seeing all these contradictory terms from the West versus the East, or say versus the South. And the question for the West is, how do we wrap our arms around all this? Are we supposed to be the stewards, environmental stewards of the world? Is America still the policeman of the world? All these questions have no answers. That's what I'm putting out there.
Or is it for the fact that humanity needs to recognize one size does not fit all? The question about time that Amy brought up, and then Zoe, you asked the question, like, why so many years later do we think that this is happening? I don't know that it's based on a person or people's. I think time just makes us numb to things. One example is obviously back in the 80s with the coming up of AIDS and HIV, and everybody was aware of it. And everybody, people in communities where you were practicing learned that they had to practice safe sex. And then we get to the aughts, certainly in Los Angeles, where it was a major issue because people were like, oh, AIDS, HIV, that's a thing of the past. The uptick of infection of HIV was crazy high. And I thought HIV was gone. Like, what are you talking about?
So should there be a vaccination that could be one that works on our...
Don't mention that to Pfizer and Moderna. They'll come up with a vaccine for climate.
No, but there should be one that stops people from wanting stuff. Surely we could make that.
Well, the other point is, if you talk to my parents are still alive and kicking. They laugh at us and our phone calls. They laugh at all these discussion points because, people of my parents' generation, they didn't throw things away. They bought a good quality product that lasted into the next generation, actually gave to your kids. They repaired it. Right. They knew how to repair it. They knew how to darn their socks. Men or females knew how to darn their socks, mind you. Most of the military guys knew how to be self-sufficient. And now we laugh at the old generation, but actually the old generation is laughing at us. We were, if you talk about energy usage per capita, they didn't use that much energy per capita. It's us who use it per capita. And now we're trying to scramble to find a solution. But really, it's a consumption problem. And I would posit this as somebody who's worked in banking for a long time. That if you raise interest rates up to 10, 12, 13, 14%, I guarantee you will see energy consumption drop like crazy. Because we have a consumer-based society based on almost a 0/- interest rate, fueling inflation. But people are borrowing like crazy, right? Debt loads, governments. If you cut that back and people said, well, you have to live with what you've got, make it stretch, I bet you we slow ourselves down. But this Wall Street will never allow that, right? Pension plans will never allow that. So you're talking about boomers' pension plans. They fuel a lot of this stuff, but nobody wants to admit it, right? Because too many people are invested and entrenched in the system.
Reliant, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then
Mr.
you
Holland.
layer in what Amy said about, the modern generation and Kardashians and the bling bling, which at the end of the day, the pension plans, they benefit from that too, right?
Hans, I had never, thank you so much for bringing up about interest rate, because I had never considered that as a element of this. And when you talk about the products that used to last forever, it wasn't that you needed a new phone or even a new, I don't know, toaster. After a few years, your toaster lasted forever. The lending was more stringent for companies. Might they also say we need to make it that our stuff lasts longer, because people aren't, like, we can't even afford to produce like we're producing. And then once we produce, then we got to find some sucker to buy it every 3 years.
Well, I guess I could pipe in a little bit. We were talking about the economy, and it's in the context of the whole climate change thing. And I think, for me, the more I read about it, the more I realize and understand that, there really isn't an answer to the climate change predicament we're in. None of the ideas are going to change positive feedback cycles. I'm living in British Columbia. I used to think I would see pictures of all the natural disasters in other parts of the world and have a lot of empathy and think to myself how grateful I am that I'm living in British Columbia where those things don't happen. Well, it's just happened. It's just happened in a huge way, in a way we just didn't expect. Thousands of farm animals dead in the fields. We've lost all of our agriculture. Unbelievable. So, and now we're talking about the economy, but I've also been, doing some reading about the economy, and we look at these exponential graphs. They're the same ones in the economical picture, the increased debt, huge, massive overlay of debt, the whole redistribution of wealth into the 1%, all of these things, inflation, the continued loss of the value of money. It's all in the same type of graph in the economy. So, we could talk about increasing interest rates or whatever it is, increasing inflation or doing this or doing that. My sense of it is we're in a pickle, and it's the same. There's no easy answer to this. You're not going to increase interest rates and it'll be solved. You're not going to find some solution to the climate predicament and it'll be solved. We're in a bind.
I hear what you're saying there, that it's a bit pitiful. It feels like we've going to let our children, grandchildren down. But I'd like to be a bit more optimistic than that. I certainly listened to that list, and my family, we've certainly stopped flying. But then on the flip side, I know I can't stop some things. I'm not going to give up my washing machine. I might give up my car. And I can understand why millions of people in the third world would like a washing machine, because hell, it's great to throw your clothes in there and come up smelling nice. And I think that's the real challenge here, is the vast inequality where we live in the West, and I think most of us are living in a Western developed society, and we have an awful lot of great things, and we do an awful lot of luxurious things. And we look at the rest of the world and say, well, you've got to stop burning coal. But they can't even have a washing machine or the basics as we think of them. And I think that's the real predicament, is that we are not being fair to the rest of the world. I don't know how you solve that. If we could solve that, I think we'd find solutions. To say stop using coal, I don't think is a solution.
Right.
We've got to somehow on using energy to make things that make everything more efficient. And yes, it's us in the West that will have to give up some things.
Rita, I saw your note in the comments about taking old jars and filling them with jam. And I think it was Matthew that responded, like, you need to share the jars with the jam in them. I'll raise my hand up for that. but certainly that would, if people were reusing, because yeah, where do we put these things?
Jonathan, I'll just add one thing here. I did some work with waste management at the city of Toronto back in Y2K days, by the way, 1999. It was interesting when I talked to the guys there. That was a time when recycling was just taking off, recycling programs, and they told me very little of what you think goes in the recycling bin actually ends up being recycled. We dumped most of it into the garbage.
Right.
The politicians like to say they've got recycling programs. It works well with the voters.
It's good marketing.
In the early days of virtue signaling, it was great to say we got recycling programs, we care about the environment. But the guys in the back were like, nah, we just dump it. There is no market for most of the recycling products. And that's still true today. And you saw that recently. And my mom is from Malaysia, so we were in the news recently, and up to a few years ago, where Australia, garbage or recycling was being recycled in China. But China has reached a point where they produce enough of their own garbage. They don't need anything from anywhere else. And so they rejected it. And a lot of that stuff was ending up on the fields in Malaysia. So these dirty secrets are we have to deal with those first, I think, before we can worry about what the rest of the world's doing.
Right. Rita, before you take off, any comments to leave us with? And then you get to say something really crazy and then turn yourself off and not have to deal with the repercussions.
Oh, well, I'm just saying, well, for example, during COVID, my husband and I used to run a residential language training center, very small center, which really came to an end for lots of reasons, but finished off by COVID. And so I've been sort of repurposing all the teaching furniture for vacation stays. So I've been covering what were sort of standard classroom type chairs. I've been making covers for them and so forth. Because I don't want to chuck them. I mean, if I were being brutally commercial, I'd have chucked them and gone to IKEA and filled the place with new stuff. Yeah. And I'd have been letting out my apartment for the last 6 months and making money out of it instead of making these covers myself. But I just find we're all too addicted to money. And I don't want to sound like a saint, but if I've got enough money, why would I need more? But I have this tussle. Am I being stupid? Insisting on repurposing everything in this way and putting myself under pressure when others wouldn't. And the old argument, oh, well, what's the point? Nobody else is doing it, But I just feel as a point of principle, one really has to live one's beliefs. But it's the waste. I am absolutely grief-stricken by the amount of waste I see and stuff that could be repurposed, recycled. If you go to a tip where people are taking all their waste stuff. I saw a woman with 2 perfectly brand new pillows because they were the wrong size for her pillowcases. And she was asking where she could dump them. And the guy said, we can't recycle those. And I just missed going over to her and saying, give them to me, I'll find a home for them. And my husband said, you don't need to find a home for anything else. We've got, because we've got too much stuff, but just the thought of this perfectly brand new stuff and the aplomb with which she just, okay, I don't need it. I'm all for, I don't need it. Let somebody else have it.
Right.
Very happy. But
I've got to say that's the first. I've never heard somebody say, I need to give up a pillow because they don't fit the pillowcase that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes you want to scream. It really does.
but Rita, this to me, I love reading about the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And one of the problems was that the incredible advances brought on by steam, for example,
yes,
and the factories that were built needed to do something. Marketing was created, and our desires for things were marketed to us. Prior to that, and I know we've talked about this before here, we didn't really work this way. We would share. We would have things when we were married. We were given a set of
bottom drawer.
Yep, all of those things. But along comes the Industrial Revolution. Factories can make incredible things. What do we make? Well, China in the early days, obviously, fireplaces, and off we go. So it's not that we have personally become bad, if you see what I mean.
I know.
We have been trained over many years, centuries, to want things, and it's very hard, and there's a huge history, and it's fascinating to see how the marketing and advertising people, you know, were founded and formed what they have. How do we turn this back? Because yes, the Industrial Revolution was fantastic, but along with it, again, came some really dreadful things.
There's always two sides of the coin, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
hell, what Shahari was talking about with the fires, we deal with that in Southern California all the time. And part of the problem is that we've built around those forests that, as part of their natural life cycle, are meant to burn and rebirth and burn and rebirth. And we just, as civilization around those places, we've now assigned the negative to a natural thing of life. Just like with what you were just saying with the Industrial Revolution, there were positives that came out of it. It wasn't all evil. There are things, there's health that came through a lot of those things.
Firstly, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm joining you from Glasgow,
Oh.
where I went to lots of COP events and got interested in things. But what I'd like to come back to is what somebody said earlier about information and how do we know? I mean, I think it's clear that to at least try and solve this climate problem, we've got to give something up. But I think what we don't have is the information of what's the most effective thing to give up. Now, I've been doing a bit of background reading and trying to find these things out. But for example, is it better to stop using your washing machine or is it better to stop using your car? And these things are actually not totally obvious. Is it better to install a heat pump or just stick with what you've got? And I feel myself making choices as a lack of information. I would contrast that with, say, choosing what to eat. There's so much stuff on a food label that gives you information that you need to make decisions. I don't know what people think about that.
So in a sort of, when you see the circles on food saying carbohydrates, fats, and so on, that you actually have that labeling.
Yes, for example, if I want to buy a washing machine, there's a label on it, certainly in the EU, telling you how efficient it is. And to me, that has changed how people behave. And more importantly, it's changed how the manufacturers behave because they sell more if the label says A rather than B.
Right. But, and the color of the label and all those other things.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about that label is it's just telling you the efficiency as it runs. It doesn't say anything about how much energy is required to make it,
right?
How much CO2 is expended in making it, and things like that. And if somehow you could compare a car, a washing machine, something else in terms of what's the carbon cost of buying it, what's the carbon cost of using it, then I think we'd be able to make more informed decisions. And I'm not saying it has to be complicated. It can just be colors, just like it is on a washing machine now.
I think that's funny though, Peter, because then we'll have to get into serving sizes and you'll find that your car is 100 servings. And I'm always shocked by how small a piece of chocolate I should really have. But in the UK, that's the same with housing as well. And just from a personal experience, moving from London to Las Vegas, if I look at my bedroom in London, there was one light, 4 electricity sockets, insulated windows, whatever. I live in a very
luxury.
Yeah. So in my condo here, which is a very basic, lovely little condo, in my bedroom, I have 10 sockets. I have 6 lights. I don't have 6 lights. I have 3. I've got a ceiling fan. I've got uninsulated windows. Just in terms of looking at what people, and I'm not having a go, but the rubbish that's put out, it's quite an incredible experience when you move from one country to another to see how different things are.
Amy put something up on the boards about it's better to invest in education so that our kids and grandkids can legislate us into ecological health.
Why do we even have these choices? It's like, I think most of us are so busy and so poor. I don't need another decision to make about, a washing machine. I need fewer decisions to make. Just take those other ones off the market. If they're not good for our ecology, our environment, Get rid of them. Why are
Yeah,
they
but
even there?
then it comes back to regulation and who's the one that's setting those rules. And when you talk about legislation, now we're talking about a whole bunch of other crazy issues like lobbying and self-interest and, you know, like, oh, well, I'm going to fight because I'm from West Virginia.
And Joe Manchin.
I just went with West Virginia, not mentioning the senator, but like my state was built on coal. So therefore that's what I'm going to fight for. Education definitely needs to be there, but I'll go back again to that one size does not fit all. So Peter was talking about the ingredients on a label. All right. There's a company in the UK, based in the UK. They've expanded to other countries now. It's called York Test. And they take a blood test and they tell you what you respond to poorly. Not allergies, but what will cause you to have inflammation. And so from this, you're able to find out, like, you know, a friend of mine took the York test and it said that that sunflower seeds was something that was really bad for him, right? So I'm thinking, well, you're not a baseball player that's chomping on a bunch of sunflower seeds. I doubt you use sunflower seeds a lot, like whatever. I was just making fun of it. But the reality is that when you look at all of those non-milks, the nut milks, all those things, they use sunflower oil as a binder or sunflower seeds as a binder. That's not on the ingredient list. So when we talk about education, we really need to talk about education, that it's all of these things that I wouldn't think, and I'm just talking about the personal health, not the environmental health, the personal health. We don't even know how to look at ourselves and how do we keep us from being inflamed. How are we going to have any sense of how to keep the world from being inflamed?
If we give things up, who is going to lose their jobs? Because let's face it, all this stuff we consume employs people. So there's as you say, there's two sides to everything. If we stop buying cars, lots of car workers are out of work, sales people, marketing people. If we stop buying washing machines, ditto, there doesn't seem to be much we can do that doesn't shake the economy.
So we were talking.
And if we shake the economy, how do we make the change?
Universal basic income is something we've been talking a lot about here. Take away the pressure for that need for money. I don't think it'll ever happen. Carlos, who's just joined us, is absolutely convinced that it is going to happen.
Just since our last meeting, Zoe, San Francisco, Los Angeles, so many other cities, just in California, have started their universal basic income play. So that's in the last month since our last conversation.
Yeah. And the closest we came last year in America was, you know, we came incredibly close to it. In fact, it happened, didn't it? With the supplemental income for those who were made unemployed by the pandemic. It happened. It is not something that is totally beyond our ability to believe it.
There's been some good research this year into the effects of furlough, using it as a kind of huge scale natural experiment in universal basic income. Very encouraging, you know, in terms of its impact, although we're all positive, and you know, it didn't make people not want to work or all of the things that are always hypothesized. So, you know, whether they feed into policy is a whole nother matter, of course.
I think one of the big fears of all the scientists and a lot of us is that we can see that if a cataclysmic event or a series of events occurred and that destroyed 70% of human beings, you know, and animals and plants, okay, that we would all change. And so the question is, until that happens, are there things that we can do that prevent that from happening? And none of us are seeing anything big taking place that's going to get in the way of that eventually happening.
Yes, I would just like to say that I think all of the points made this afternoon have been interesting and well taken, but the most significant is the one that has to do with the impact of all of our efforts on employment. And I don't think we can give it short shrift by just saying basic universal income, because somebody has to have the jobs that pay the taxes that make the universal income possible. So we can't ignore the importance of whatever we do as far as its impact on employment opportunities.
Thank you.
I agree. I think that there's also a mental element of sense of purpose for people, which is huge in terms of how much they care about what the world is like, how long the world is going to be around, if they feel that there's no, like, yes, Sarah, you're right on so many levels. I guess it's a question, or Carlos, you're our society guy. Bring it to us.
No, the society guy is putting some ideas that is very new for me. I don't know if you are aware of the NFTs, and I just knew about them, and it's part of what is based the future metaverse of Facebook and all these tech companies, which is the virtual and real or non-virtual or whatever you want to call it. But what I put there is 2 articles that talk about the huge environmental crisis that is going to happen with the growth of the NFTs and the Bitcoins and the blockchain and everything that we said that is on the cloud. And people think that really are on the cloud. No, there are some servers in the deserts in US and in other places. And it needs a lot of materials that some of them are really hard to find. And it creates also social problems because it becomes like part of a mafia. And so I just sent just one example of how bad they are going to be. And we are not, at least I am just becoming aware of the huge environmental impact that the cloud is having on us.
Yeah,
I think it always comes down to choice, right? And forethought. Because if to what you're saying, Carlos, yes, the mining of crypto, the manipulation of NFTs is incredibly energy wasteful. Yet, when you talk about server farms, there's a huge server farm in Iceland that is completely carbon neutral because of the way that it's powered and the way that they set up that system.
We've invented our next disaster, effectively, if this type of thing gets started. The current, and this is an old statistic, the amount of electricity used by Bitcoin mining is equivalent to Argentina in terms of the energy used. However, there are things that can be done about that, and there are different ways of using a more permissioned base, which I won't go into the tech on, blockchain architecture that doesn't do this. But will we actually use that? I don't know, but I think we've invented our next disaster, Carlos. I really do. I agree.
Shahar, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just a brief thing towards the end. At the last Vancouver Film Festival, I went and saw a movie called Havel about the president of Czechoslovakia and how he came into power. And the way it impacted me in relation to this conversation is how the people of Czechoslovakia just rose up in their hundreds of thousands. And, he wasn't a particularly charismatic, huge Obama type leader or anything like that, but he just found himself in the place where they needed somebody, and he had all the skills that were needed to fill that place. Where I'm seeing the parallel is how, how many people are talking, we're talking, and so many people are, that we have to come together somehow, in a way that everybody can stand together and make something happen the way it happened there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the difference, though, is that as we've taught today, there's so it was quite simple. The Russians, get rid of the Russians, right? I mean, one simple objective, and there they go. They could all come together and they could all come into the streets, and they all had that one objective. But what would be the one single unified, like we've talked about so many things here tonight, everything from not having washing machines to this or that. I mean, so many different things. Is there one thing that everybody could come together and go into the streets and find a leader like Havel and change the world? Anyway, that was the movie. If you ever get a chance to see that movie, it's a fabulous movie.
Well, I would definitely vote for Amy Moser. Absolutely.
So would I.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I'm putting together a youth army, so stay tuned.
Oh, good, 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 good.
Is
So-
there a way to create we have the Human Rights Charter. We have a huge number of countries that have signed up to it. Jonathan's shaking his head. So that's clearly not going to work for him. Does it take a personality? Is that what we're looking for in this?
It was more an issue, and he
I beg your pardon.
he was there. He was able to fill the shoes of what they needed in the time. So it wasn't that he stood up and said, "This is what we need to do." It's all the people in their hundreds of thousands in the streets saying, it's not that it's saying we need a leader. You're our leader. We want you. We want somebody, whoever it is, we want out of this.
Yes, if it's so much easier, as you rightfully said, if there's one target or a very clear target, and we don't have that here other than the larger climate is really run amok. The environment is taking a big hit. We've got many people around the world that say that's not true. Many that say it is true. And why, like, here's the science and here's, well, that's not the right science. One thing that rings very true, it sits really interestingly with me. When the pandemic was just starting, my wife and I and the kids, we didn't feel comfortable with her getting on a flight to go clear out her father's house after he had passed in Florida. So we did a cross-country trip in the car. It was a last moment decision. We thought, let's do this on Saturday night, 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, we were gone to go from Los Angeles to Florida. On the way back was when everything was closing down in the States. So this is the middle of March, everything closing down. It was a different world when we were going east than when we were going west. And my wife said something that it still stands with me today. At the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was talking about how those who were sick were losing the ability to breathe. So while people were losing the ability to breathe, they were also talking about how pollution was at its least, at its lowest, in just a week of really closing down, was at its lowest than it's been in over 20 years. And my wife said, it's as if the world is able to breathe because we're breathing less. And it was very poignant, and it rings true. And it's a question of, what does breath really need to be for us? What can we do? How can we look at ourselves? How can we look at our communities? What do we need to expect from our governments? And because, as Mitch was talking about, the 70% of all things being gone, that certainly is going to cause a lot of opportunity for breathing, but at what cost? It's been a great session. Thank you all for being here. As always, you can find everything at augmentedsociety.org. We do our discussions once a month. We do other projects throughout the year. So check that site out, sign up for it. Our next session is a end of year, let's call it a celebration, because this one was a little bit, got to be honest, a little bit of a downer. But I always like to be positive, and that there is still hope. But at the end of the year, the next session in December, will all be looking back at the year that's passed with how much has changed, coming out and into lockdowns and vaccines and all of that stuff, and looking ahead, saying, what do we see that's coming up? What are the technologies? What are the movements? What's exciting? What do we want to keep our finger on the pulse of? And I'm hoping that you all can make it. Thank you so much for coming, for being present, for really bringing something special to this conversation, because there's much more needed of it. And it is always the magic of the Augmented Society Network is the people that join us each time. So thank you so much.